Well, first and foremost, thank you for making the time on a weekend, no less. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, it's nice to be here. I it's been a while since I've done a podcast. And so I think this one will be where there's no rehearsed script,
Yeah. Oh, do you do some with rehearsed scripts?
No, but it's more like you get comfortable in telling the same thing over and over, and it just becomes almost like habit or instinct. And so when you have a break, it's almost like when you're not doing this, like I do a lot of outside teaching, and when you have a long break, you forget your patterns and how you arrived at that content. So.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that because I was just talking to my wife about this. Like, when people come on, I try and prepare, right? I try and research about them. But I try and only research to a point where I can ask somewhat relevant questions.
Yeah.
What I don't want to do is listen to previous podcasts, kind of, because to your point, I don't want to subconsciously just start leading you down the same road.
Right.
The last three people did, and then the listeners aren't getting anything new. So I'm completely with you there. Well, we were catching up beforehand a little bit. And what I didn't realize is that you worked in tech for almost 25 years.
Sales, executive level sales. Yeah, that was my dream.
Yeah. Okay. So it was the dream. What changed?
It wasn't satisfying.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really admire about talking with people that are older is if they have specialized in a particular craft, a skill,
okay,
and they've spent some time there, their knowledge is rich, it's deep, and I find that appealing. And one of the things, if you're in an area for a long amount of time, and you're good at it, you start seeing patterns. And being in sales and working with commodity managers, purchasing managers, directors of materials, the purchasing side, you begin to see those patterns of behavior. And with a lot of exposure, those patterns are almost predictable in order to satisfy them. And so once I kind of figured out the game, it started to lose interest because there was no more risk. The buzz for me is the unknown. And if it starts turning into automation, I get bored. And that's what I got distracted during, one of the most important jobs of my career, and being a part of West Coast from Mississippi West of a $500 million company. I was looking over the fence for something better.
Yeah.
And not in terms of a similar job, a hobby I was looking for, like something to occupy my time, something to keep me motivated.
So I laugh when you say that because it's funny. Even at my first job, and I'm very fortunate where I work, if you're listening, because it's actually a great company, and fortunately what we do is really interesting. And I'm not going to bore people with that right now, but I remember my first sales job, I was in a meeting that for our company was a really big meeting, and our chief revenue officer was in the meeting too. And I just had this realization. He was maybe 30 years older than I am at that time. And I was sitting there and I was like, I'm not even that energized for this meeting. And I was like, and he's sitting in this exact same meeting too. I was like, is this what I want to be doing in 30 years? Like to your point, like I'm already even at, in a 5-year time span, starting to see some of these patterns emerge, and you kind of like lose that energy of the unknown. So I can relate to that a lot. So what, for you, I guess, what was that hobby that you found?
Well, so I had always been involved in health and fitness, like the sport of triathlon. So I did the sport of triathlons back in my college days. So in my from 18 to probably 27 years old. And
really, you were doing triathlons that early?
Yeah. So in the 80s, so this was when triathlons really started to shape its direction. There was an early thought process in triathlons that you had to be a big individual in order to do it, because the volume was so significant that you had to be strong, and strong was, these 200-pound guys. Oh yeah. And I come along.
So counterintuitive now. I guess now what I envision, a really like elite triathlete, that's not what I picture.
Yeah, because the belief was you had to have power, you had to have speed and strength, and it was a weird time because there was these two populations of people competing, and I'll never forget. I mean, one of the early races that I did back in 1983 was a race in Northern California, and I'm standing there. I had just done the Ironman 5 months prior, so the one in Kona,
Okay,
and I was a decent swimmer. I think I exited the water first or second in that event in Kona. And
wow, okay,
I was on the front line of a starting line with 800 people. And we were getting ready to storm, the beach into the water, attack the water, the lake. And there was a bigger guy, 200 pounds behind me. And he's all, "Hey, little kid." Now, I'm 19.
right.
And as a 19-year-old, I was on the smaller side, and I turn around and it's this bigger guy, and he looks at me. He's all, "You don't get out of my way, I'm going to run you down." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like what is happening?" Like I'm getting like, well, luckily there was a guy by the name of Scott Molina, who was one of the original CrossFit superstars.
Oh, okay.
His nickname was the Terminator because he literally won anything and everything. And he was standing next to me, and he turns around, he's all, "That's that Hinshaw kid. I think he could handle himself in the water."
Okay.
And it was nice. And that was like a moment for me where one of the people that I genuinely respected, and I was shocked that one, he knew who I was, but two, he stuck up for me.
Yeah.
And it made, like, a lot of these things as an athlete have shaped myself as a coach. And I recognize now that it doesn't matter who you are. Every athlete at the highest level has fear of the unknown. And it's nice that if a coach is somewhat like welcoming and nurturing in a way versus intimidating and being a bully.
Yeah. And it's good to hear that. And I think that is becoming, what's the right way to phrase that? Like more well received.
Mm-hmm.
So I played college football, and again, of course, being from Seattle, I'm a big Seahawks fan, but Pete Carroll, right? Yep. As far as like an NFL mentality, like he's very much like, hey, like, coach the individual, like speak to them in a way that they're going to respond to. And we don't need to tear these guys down, right? We can actually find a way to build them up and like probably get more out of them rather than taking the intimidation route. And, I played for both. And I can say resoundingly, like, when someone like showed some belief in you and a little bit of validation, if it can give you that boost to the next level in terms of self-confidence, I mean, that can take you so much further.
I totally agree with you. And I think the mistake, like I look back on my career, I just did what I was told. It wasn't an environment where I can ask questions of, why don't I have a finishing kick? Why is it that I can't win a sprint to the finish? I didn't even have an environment to be able to ask those questions. I just did what I was told.
Oh, and this is in college?
Yeah. And it was my voice didn't matter. And I could have been better. I could have been better if there was an environment where there was this exchange of information. Yeah. Because I never understood the purpose of the workouts that I was doing. Like, what's the reason we're doing 10 by 1 mile the second time in a week? Did you forget we did it earlier, or is this some reasoning? And I was not putting as much emphasis into these training programs because I didn't feel a part of it. Yeah. Nobody did. And that was the environment.
Well, I think it probably depends on the person too, right? Because there's some athletes, it's like, hey, run through that wall. And they're like, okay, done. No questions. But, I would say myself and a lot of people who are really successful athletes, to your point, like they want to understand the why. And when that's effectively communicated, I feel like that you just get buy-in, like.
Exactly. It's the same thing though. Like you have your job and you're going into work. If you were just told by your boss, your coach, do it. It's like you're now a kid and a parent's ordering you to take out the trash, to mow the lawn. Right. And it's like your voice doesn't matter. And so what you're going to do is you're going to step back versus getting vested. And if you're involved in this process, if you're a participant and you own it, now the behavior changes. And I like where this generation, that is the core, the younger generation in the workforce today, is asking these things. They're changing managers' behavior.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I would say that's accurate.
Yeah, so, which makes a better employee, because these kids nowadays, they're openly saying, I'm only going to spend 3 years max at this job and then I'm moving on. I'm out of here. There's no commitment on their part. And the reason is because there was no commitment by management. Well, now management's involving them. They're taking their ideas. Before, like when we were talking before we started recording. Yeah. I did a lot of tech sales into Apple Computer in Cupertino, California, right? The mothership.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
And Apple created a campus where they didn't want people to leave. You came to work and basically you need a place to sleep? No problem. We got it for you. You want a place to eat? We got, 5-star chefs sitting there making any type of food that you want. Right. They were taking as much as they could out of these people until they were smoked, till they were fried, and then they kicked them to the curb. Right. But it was catering to their lack of commitment as well. Well, now that thought process is like, wow, we're going to put a lot of time and energy into these individuals. Why do we want to kick them to the curb? We're essentially training them with our methodology. Why do we want to keep replicating that over and over and over again? And so these kids are making a change, and that movement's taking hold. That's why people are able to work at home now, because the workers are proving they're responsible. They don't need mom and dad watching over them to make sure they're cranking out work product. Exactly. And at least not the employees that you want, right? Like I'm sure at some point, like, those who can are going to get filtered out. But yeah, I'd say you're absolutely right. If you're personally invested in any sort of cause, I mean, you're just naturally going to give more. And that's important. And I think, like you said, right, it's that having a voice, which is so critical. But that's a part of athlete ownership too, is that if the athlete doesn't have a voice, if they don't own, if you're a coach and you write a workout and you explain the purpose of that workout, you eventually hand it off to the athlete to perform. Well, in reality, we don't know if the athlete is executing it to what you really imagined it to be. You don't know if they're doing, let's say, maximal intensity or 99% or 98%. You don't know. Right. And so you have to, in some way, get them to take that ownership so that they actually do put in that effort, but it's voluntarily, not by force, not because you're yelling and screaming. They did it by a choice. Yeah. So for you personally, right, how do you approach that? Like you said, right, you can, to the best of your ability, try and give them a voice, but ultimately they need to take that ownership. Like over the course of your career, have you found effective ways to kind of help bring that out of your athletes, or at least create an environment where that's, kind of able to happen? Yeah. So there's I mean, the core way, one of the ways that I started writing workouts was I was trying to create these progressions where workouts would build and progressively get more and more challenging. And if I start out, and let's say with you, I want to build up your running capacity. And so we're going to do a workout that it's 10 rounds of 1 minute of running with 1 minute of walking. Okay. Well, let's just say I want to get you up to 30 rounds of 1 minute of running with 10 seconds of rest. Well, you're looking at 30 rounds, 1 minute on, 10 seconds of, that's impossible. So what we do in training is we gradually dose the body with a particular stimulus, in this case, running, and I'm gradually week after week increasing the volume. And then that stimulus is going to create an adaptation, which is your body's going to get comfortable and do more volume. The problem is that you look at that end number and you're like, impossible. But if we take a gradual approach, the body adapts in that. And that's how you would build, as a coach, a particular direction, whether it's speed, strength, volume. You would focus in that particular way. And when I would write these workouts, I was thinking, how do I get an athlete to want to take the next step versus me pushing it. That's a trick. Like, how do you get them to voluntarily do something more difficult?
Right.
And so what I started doing was writing workouts that, hey, your next workout is this one. Oh, but by the way, there's the next workout beyond that. So I'm showing you both options. And if you feel that this workout's too easy, you could leapfrog ahead. So a good example would be is, let's say you wanted to get better at climbing a rope.
Okay.
All right. Your goal is to work on the pull. How am I going to do that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a progression that it's going to say, we're going to do one rope climb. And then I'm going to have you do a static hold on the rope before you get off of the rope. And so that hold on the rope, that time under tension, let's say it's 10 seconds. So you climb the rope once, you're going to hold for 10 seconds. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to not let you sit around and do nothing for recovery before doing the next round. I'm going to have you hop on a Concept 2 ski erg, and I'm going to take that same pull pattern, but do it in a recovery format. So let's just say you do a minute nice and slow. That's how runners or endurance athletes build capacity. They'll do a 100-meter sprint, and then they'll do a 300-meter jog instead of 3 minutes of rest, right? They're focusing on building volume, but the intent is they build it through the recovery side of the equation. So you would do, instead of sitting around and doing nothing between your rope climbs and static holds, you're going to pull for a minute. Right. Slow. It's recovery.
Yeah.
And let's just say that you do that 5 times through. So there's your workout. Next week you come back and your workout's going to be this. I want you to climb the rope 1.5 times with the same 10-second hold and the same 1 minute. That's workout option 1.
Okay.
Or you're going to climb the rope 1 time, and instead of a 10-second hold, you're going to now hold for 15. And then you're going to do the 1 minute. So I'm going to give you a choice. Which one do you want to do?
Right.
And each week, what I'm going to do is dangle that 1.5 rope climbs. And I have to have it there because the goal is to climb the rope, not more static hold. Right. So every week I increase your static hold 15 seconds, 20, 30. You want to go back to 10 seconds? I need you to climb the rope 1.5 times. And then we'll reset. So if you want to sit there and static hold for a minute, it's fine by me. We're still getting progress. But what I do is I build the workouts where the athlete has the option to progress.
Oh, I love that.
And what happens is the athlete will always go in the ultimate direction by choice. I'm not making them do anything.
Yeah.
What I'm telling them is that you by choice are going to go that way. So you could easily do that in a program like a Couch to 5K, where it's a combination of jogging and walking. You know, I'm totally comfortable with you jogging and walking. And each time I'm going to increase the total amount of time that you're going to be doing it. But if you're willing to change the intensity to where it's now a run and a walk, meaning it's a higher level of intensity, I'm going to reduce your volume down to the original 15 minutes of total work. And they're always going to go in that direction. But it's a choice that they have. You're empowering them as part of the process. And that's where I've evolved as a coach, is that, you know, you work with enough kids are tired of being told what to do. And there's no difference if you are in your 30s or 40s and life got in the way of your fitness, right? You're now overweight because of the stresses of your job or family or a mortgage, whatever it is. Yeah. And you've lost your fitness. Those insecurities that kids have are the same that those people have. And what I've realized is that if you're going to make a connection for them to come back and be coached by you tomorrow, then you have to involve them in the process because of insecurities that they have. And elites are no different. The elites, the best of the best, CrossFit Games Champions, the same exact thing. Matter of fact, they're, in my opinion, even more fragile because they've built this house of cards based upon prior performances. And if I pull one of those out, now doubt creeps in. Yeah. And now they're starting to plug the dike with their fingers. And those are the most dicey But it comes back to what I said. You've got to involve them all in the process.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Hey, so here's something, and we started going down this path, and I'm dying to know. So I didn't realize that you had worked in tech for so long. I mean, 25 years. To your point, right? You were a senior sales executive controlling a Western United States, right, for a major corporation. So, we talked a little bit about you started doing triathlons early on. I mean, I hope it's fair to say you are like the authority on endurance training. Right? Like when aerobic capacity gets mentioned, I feel like your name right now is synonymous for good reason. So
Thanks.
How did that transition happen? Right? Because I guess I'd imagine a lot of folks listening would have just assumed that you have kind of been on this path, for decades, right? Like maybe you went to school for it and you were a track coach but it's not that at all. So can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Sure. So I was always back in my triathlon days involved in coaching. Matter of fact, I worked for Apple Computer when as a consultant, I would go in and give speeches in Apple in the 80s.
No kidding.
Oh yeah. It was like health and fitness talks, motivation talks.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And it was mostly just to get in front of people and to find a way to communicate. And that's what actually made the transition into sales easy, because I was already in front of, tech people giving talks and convincing them of my product. Mm-hmm. And so the problem is that there wasn't any money in coaching. There wasn't a way to survive. Right. And even though I had a huge amount of connections coming out of that, right? I mean, knowing the family that owns Shimano bicycle and fishing components, like knowing that family, it's like that, which was amazing, but you can't parlay it in anything. And so the natural segue for me was really just getting into sales. And I found that I had a gift in doing it. I was pretty good at, and a lot of it is I'm not intimidated by the purchasing managers and their tactics, right? On-time delivery and quality, and we need to continuous price reductions and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I was really selling based upon value. I was trying to find ways that created value in a unique way. So some of the ideas that I had and we implemented was, you have a very tight schedule in terms of your R&D development program. So we don't have enough time to wait for you to generate drawings and samples and prototypes. I'll tell you what, I'm going to put 3 engineers inside of your building. They will work for you. I'll pay them. They're going to make all your prototypes, all your drawings, all your samples for free.
Oh, wow.
That way we can compress the schedule.
Yeah.
Well, the reason, and all I wanted out of that was I wanted to be able to have a opportunity to bid on the project when it went into production. And so
so smart.
And the way that you would get these deals is that you had the supply chain figured out. You had better information. Most of the problem that you have when you're quoting a particular project is that you just don't have the luxury of time. If you have more time, you could find better sourcing and you could find different pricing opportunities and just-in-time delivery to reduce inventory costs. I had all of those. And so, I would put those programs into place, and there was nothing different what I was doing in the sales world that I didn't do in the athletic world. In the athletic world, I was trying, I had a $2,500 Campagnolo disc wheel that was given to me as a sponsored athlete. And that was good for about a minute of free time in a 40-kilometer time trial bike ride in a triathlon.
Okay.
And that was a competitive advantage. And so I was trying to find, as an athlete, maybe I replace all my bicycle components that are stainless steel with titanium components. And now my bike all of a sudden weighs a pound less. Those types of things. And
trying to find efficiencies and advantages. And so your mind always operated in that way, no matter what you were doing. Yeah,
always. So as a sidetrack, as a kid, I had a huge OCD problem, and I didn't know. So as a kid, you don't know when you're normal or you don't know your weirdness is So I would take just walking down the hallway in my house. I had a tendency to want to hit the front side of an object and then flip the back side and hit it. And if I didn't hit it, I'd have to start all the way over again. And I was walking down the hallway one time when I was in 7th grade with my best friend, and the overhang that we were on, it was held up by these steel pillars. And I was tapping them, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, it brings me luck." And he's like, "Freak." And I was like, wait. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, no one does do that. And I stopped doing it. But what I did.
You were able to stop. Interesting.
Well, it doesn't just go away like that. So what I did is I started internalizing that tap one side, tap the other. And so I realized that if I can manipulate a conversation, I can guide my question to make you answer in a certain way. And since I know what your answer is going to be, I already have the next question queued, which I basically can do that in a conversation.
Yeah.
And so that's what it turned into be. And I got to where I could do that really fast in my head and guide conversations. So I actually started the sport of CrossFit. I went to the original gym, the mothership in SoCal, California. And I went there to mostly restore my health from doing, 8 years of competitive triathlon training, and my body was just messed up. And when I went into the gym that day, I left the first day. I didn't even go to the class. I was so intimidated. I had to recalibrate my perception of myself versus who I actually was. I thought I was, when we talk about guys like you back in the day, I know when you say those words, you're about to brag about your football days, right? Back in the day when I was playing football, I'm like, here it comes.
Oh boy. Here we go. Right? This guy brought me on just to tell me about his last game senior year.
Right.
Sit through it.
Right. And so I carried that with me of my impression of myself into the gym that day. And I immediately recalibrated on that hour-long drive home of like, wow, I'm not who I think I am anymore. That person that I did all of that with is gone. I'm now afraid to exercise. And so I went into the gym though. And the first thing that I realized was, wow, look at the excitement, the passion that these coaches have. And I realized immediately the contrast between what I was doing in my career versus what they were doing. I was a robot and I was great at it, but it was autopilot. There was and I started to really wake up from that moment on. Well, I got into just taking some people out to the track with me, and I started running again, thanks to CrossFit, and just working, the neglected muscle groups and just getting my health and fitness back. And
around what year was this?
That was 2008. So,
2008. Okay.
Yep. So 3 years later, I ran. So 2011, 12, 13, I ran sub 5-minute miles, 60-second 400. Okay. 50 years old. And people were coming out to the track. I was running 3 days a week, and I was just running health and fitness. Well, next thing you know, there's 20 people out on the track. And I was only doing it in spare time. I was just, I would go to the track after work, and next thing you know, there's 20 people. And that opportunity, eventually led me into coaching Jason Khalipa, who was a CrossFit Games champion in 2008. And he asked me to coach him in 2012.
Okay.
And what that turned into was coaching him in what I know on how to build aerobic capacity. How do we take a speed, strength, power athlete and give him a better balance in his overall fitness? And he went on that year in 2013 at the Games to dominate every endurance event. And this was a guy that would finish dead last. I mean, this guy was so bad in his endurance that in a 7K run in 2009 at the Games, he passed out with 100 meters to go, in a 7K.
So, what's funny? I've actually never been to a CrossFit class. I've always wanted to. I don't know why I haven't to this point. Now, I mean, I'm so busy and I live out in the country. It's like,
Yeah.
and I've kind of found my own lane, but I love watching CrossFit content. I love the documentaries. I love watching the stuff on YouTube. Like if I need a little motivation, I throw it on. So I'm very well aware about a lot of the stuff that's happened in the sport without actually doing a CrossFit class.
Yeah.
So like the stuff that you're saying about Khalipa, I completely remember seeing. I mean, he's a big guy. He's not tall per se, but I mean, he's jacked. Yeah,
oh my gosh, he's so big. When I met him the first time, actually the second time, I barely remember because I'm a fan of the sport, right? And the first time I met him, I messed up that conversation. I was so nervous. But the second time, I sit down with him, and it's kind of like you do with any new athlete. You're going through like an assessment protocol of finding where's the opportunities so that you're not wasting the person's time. And I asked him, I said, how much you weigh? And he's like, 208. And I'm looking over, and I'm like, I would say 230. And he kind of giggles a little bit. And he's like, well, I won the CrossFit Games in 2008. And so I like weighing 08. And I'm like, oh my God, you're an adult. And that's something like a high school kid does on their basketball stat sheet.
Right. Right. Like, oh, wow.
Which I liked because it was like, he's now like, this is a fun guy because this journey is not going to be that easy. And so he actually gave me a really good opportunity because he introduced me to some others. And that year, I coached 3 people that went to the games, and they got second place overall, 5th and 9th.
Oh, wow.
And then through
this is 2012, 2013. So the competition at this point has like really grown, and it's not legitimized is, I don't think is the right word, but it's taken a huge leap, right? In just like 4 to 5 years from where it was when Khalipa initially won it. So that's a pretty big deal. Well,
and I changed. So I was very controversial because I didn't, the things that were being done in the sport, and granted, I came from experience because I'd been doing the sport for 5 years. And so I understood what was the task, what were they trying to accomplish? Okay. And so I knew the variables, and it didn't make any sense to me if the average time domain of a CrossFit Games workout was 8 to 10 minutes. Why is everybody training at anaerobic fast twitch, low volume, long recovery? It doesn't make any sense. You're not putting the right stimulus on the body to create adaptation. So I was heavily criticized, and I love Jason and Garrett Fisher and Neil Maddox for sticking by me that year and defending me because I made them run 20 miles, and people told them, he's ruined you. You will never recover. And they went and dominated. Yeah. And it changed the sport. It changed it. This concept of pacing in 2013 and in 14 was unheard of. Yeah. What do you mean? The job is to go as fast as you possibly can. That's how you actually can create the greatest amount of work. Yeah. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And what I love too, though, is in 2016, I had changed the sport so significantly that CrossFit HQ came to me and said, you have an aerobic capacity course, a seminar that you do on your own. We'd like to partner with you. And that to me was a wake-up call that they're recognizing the sport evolves. And if there are other ways to create greater functional fitness, then we want to be a part of it. And I respect that they're not so fast in saying, it's our way and only our way from day one. They're evolving.
And they could, because to your point, they could have just like shifted the structure of the events in the games. They're like, you know what? We don't like the way that this is going. So let me ask, and I've got a bunch of questions on things you just said, but now I'm wondering, for you, when did you realize that what had become a hobby had become something that you could throw yourself into full time? I guess that's number one. And number two, like, when did you realize that you had kind of hit like a tipping point and things were really taking off?
That's a great question. So I did it all for free. For 3 years, I coached anybody and everybody for free, thousands of people. And I was writing workouts. I had 55 athletes at the CrossFit Games in 2015. And I was giving them workouts on a weekly basis, personalized, all for free. I've never charged actually an athlete that I've worked with that went to the CrossFit Games. I've never, zero, no money.
That's incredible.
All my travel, ever. And I've never asked them for anything either.
Yeah.
And the reason is like in the beginning, I wanted to learn the craft. I wanted to just understand, how do we take these athletes that are not interested in specializing in a particular sport, that they want to do variety, and how do we maximize their fitness more efficiently and effectively? How can we do that? And so we want to make them fast in terms of their speed, but we also want to give the ability to endure. And so that's why I was doing all of this early on for free. And when I was at the games in afterwards in 15, and I'm sitting and I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I can manage both of these. I could do a full-time job, and I could coach, and I could be effective. And there was a guy that runs HGST. So he ran Mike Cardano. He ran HGST. So it used to be Western Digital, Hitachi.
Okay. I got you.
And hard disk drives. And I got to know him through Jason Khalipa. And one day we were sitting, he came and I would do a Saturday class at the track or a running clinic for free and teach people just the biomechanics of running. And he was there, and we were sitting on the football field afterwards. And he's like, hey, I know that you think that you're managing both of these. But every time when you're going from your regular job to coaching, there is a transition. It's the same transition that you would feel after a 2-week vacation. You got to get back into the groove of things, that you're lagging, you're a little slower, you're not as sharp. Right. And he says, I'm not telling you that you're bad in either of them. What I'm telling you is that you would be much better if you just did one of those things. And I'm like thinking about it on the way home after talking to him. I'm like, he wasn't telling me what to do, but he really was telling me what to do.
He was putting that next workout out in front of you.
But that's what a great leader does.
Yeah,
he was saying something to not tell me what to do. He was giving enough information to start that thought process going. And once he lit the fuse, he went and separated himself. And that's what that's why he's a great leader and a great CEO of a major organization in the world. Yeah. He lights the fuse. And I got to thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going for it. So I went from a 25-year career. I gave 2 weeks notice, and I switched to making zero money and living in Silicon Valley.
How did that feel?
I was a wreck. I was nervous.
Really? Okay.
Well, I was really honestly nervous because of the perception that friends and family would have. Like, what are you doing? Are you having a midlife crisis? It's a lot of things that I realized that I was doing was because of perception that others had towards me. And that was guiding me. And that was a huge learning curve for me. I was always, why am I exhausted all the time? Why am I? It's like, because I'm trying to please everybody. And the last person that was, pleasing. When's the last time I went to the dentist back then? I couldn't even tell you, because my personal well-being was last. And there was a negative dripping type of effect of everything I touched because of it. And that was an eye-opener for me when I transitioned out. Was I'm not doing this for anybody. And if people are critical and commenting about how dumb I am for making this decision, this isn't for them. Right. And I realized right then, and I wish I did it sooner, I'm not. Remember when you're a kid And if you're sitting there and you have a job, like I had a job of, you ever heard of honey baked hams?
Yeah. I have heard of honey baked hams.
So I did that job.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Oh yeah. We coated them with the brown sugar and all of that. And then we had to glaze them.
Wow. Okay.
It was a nightmare. Yeah, it was a bad job. And I remember the boss was accusing me of taking breaks because it was really hot glazing. I'd go into the ice cooler where all of the soft drinks and, you know, the hams were, and I'd just sit there. I'd have to get the core down. You know, I was overheating. Mm-hmm. And he came in and he's accusing me. And whether he was right or wrong, I was like, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. Just with that, I'm like, I'm going to go get another job.
Right.
But as we age, we lose that ability to, you know what, take that gamble and just say, you know what, I'm out because of the pressures of life. Right.
Yep.
Like,
you're talking to someone with 3 kids. Yeah. Cause now you start piling on mortgage, long-term stability. Like you're right. Yeah. And it's very easy to get trapped in a situation where it's like, you're just trying to maintain the status quo and do, you know, now that, I mean, not that I'm necessarily doing that myself, but from like an outside perspective, it's like, okay, he's doing well. He has a good job.
Right.
You know, it's very tough to break out of that cycle because it feels like there's so much potential risk and that risk could be catastrophic, right?
And
like if it doesn't work
invested.
out.
You've like, think about your career. You've invested how many years? It's like an athlete. You've invested all this time in your training. Mm-hmm. Why don't you just keep moving and going in that direction? And you're just like chopping it off and then just doing a complete shift.
Yeah.
Of course people would think you're crazy.
Exactly. Oh yeah. No, I mean, you know, I mean, this is not that related, but I have buddies who are lawyers and I mean, they feel stuck. They're like, 2 different degrees. I've spent all this money. It's not even paid off yet. And now I find out that like, this is pretty miserable. Like, you know, like I'm making good money, but I have terrible hours. I don't enjoy it. And I mean, they feel stuck. Yeah. And so it's tough. It really is tough for people to break out of that. It's okay. So you felt, you were a wreck, but
it was awful.
Yeah.
It was awful, but I had success. And so that the thing is even though I wasn't making any money, I had success, and that's what the public sees, right? I always tell people that, you know, I've had a lot of people that have gone to the CrossFit Games and have won, you know, teenagers and masters, like 30 people that have sat on the top of the podium.
It's insane. I was looking at the stats and I was like, how is that even possible?
A lot of work.
Awesome. Yeah.
But it's also part, like when I was looking at those things, I never really, those aren't my wins. There's so many other factors that go along with it. But the thing that I do really credit myself with is those athletes keep coming back and wanting to be trained by me tomorrow. So like Katrin, who, you know, Davidstotter, she's won the games twice, like 6 years and we're still working together. That's what I'm talking about, is that retention side. And so the public saw this accomplishment thing, but what I saw was I have something where I can retain people. And if I can do that for the general public, then there's something there. And so that's what I transitioned. And being in Silicon Valley, you know, it's a very difficult place to live because of the very high cost of living. I made a lot of money, but my burn rate was ahead of my income. And the value though in Silicon Valley is the skill set of the people that live there. There is a skill set, a talent pool that is unlike any other pool of people, where you can sit down and have conversations on multiple levels, in multiple planes, in parallel. And so, and those things are happening.
And that becomes addicting as well. You can get addicted to like that. So so I remember, like I said, I don't remember if I said it once we started or not, but I grew up north of Seattle, in a town called Arlington. Fantastic place to grow up. I love it. I still love to go back. Yeah. But it's like when I started going back from New York to Arlington, it was just like the pace of life that people operated at. And like, to your point, like the types of conversations and how quickly, like your brain, like, you know, when you're around really, really bright, talented people all the time, you have to kind of adapt and come up to their level and just, you know, to be able to carry a conversation.
Right.
And so it's like, but you can kind of get addicted to that energy, so to speak. And yeah, Silicon Valley obviously has that in spades. I mean, what is California, like the 13th biggest economy in the world or something on its own? It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, and so being like in that space in high tech, I knew a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it was really easy for me to take my thought process and what I was doing in terms, so everything that I was doing for athletes was personalized. What I was realizing is that I can create certain algorithms. So I'm more of a math, finance, numbers guy. Like, nothing turns me on more than a good spreadsheet. And so I could take these numbers and predict where workouts should be performed at, like in terms of the balance between volume, intensity, and recovery, and prescribe all of them based upon the level of the athlete. And I started talking to people of like, how do you automate this? How can we, through a series of algorithms, instead of me doing one by one, how can we streamline this? Well, that information's readily available in Silicon Valley. Like those answers are easy. Yeah. And so that's what I was doing was I was trying to just find a way to scale so that I wasn't spending, 80 hours a week writing one by one. And once I figured that out, then it was off to the races because I had enough sample size. By this time I had coached over 3,000 people. It was like my sample size was enough that I felt that the algorithms I was using was robust.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you, like, your expertise in aerobic capacity, how did you develop that? Is it a combination? Because clearly, like you said, you're well experienced given your background in triathlons. And you're also a pretty good swimmer. I think you danced around that a little bit, but I think you were actually a really good swimmer if memory and the internet serves me correctly. How did you build out? Well, let me ask you this, what is it that's setting you apart with regards to your approach to building aerobic capacity for the athletes that you work with?
It's about the precision. If you go in and you look at, let's say, just go and pick, if you want, just type on the internet, half marathon training program.
Right.
And look at what is provided. It's a generic, generalized program. And the problem is that I came from a space that time was precious. And here we were in tech in Silicon Valley, and we're trying to create ways to increase productivity in the same amount of total time. And so I took that same thing and I'm like, wait a minute, if in the CrossFit space, if an athlete only gives me one workout a week, I can't make a mistake. I can't cover it up with more volume, another workout. I can't do that. It has to be the highest and best use of their time. And I was always going back to the same thing in the business world. If I have a salesperson that is trying to go out and get a deal, I have to make sure that whatever they're working on is the highest and best use of their time to service the company. I took the same thing and applied it towards the individual in their strengths and weaknesses relative to their goal. And that's where it lies. It lies in the precision and the accuracy of what you're asking them to do. And coming from CrossFit, we are experts in movement. And so I don't look at, let's say, the sport of surfing as surfing. I look at what are the movement patterns? What are the muscle groups? What energy systems are being used and by when? What muscle fiber groups? Where are injury rates? And that's how I'm looking at it. I don't see a golfer in playing golf. I look at, wow, all of their core strength is rotational strength. And so if I'm going to be doing sit-ups, what kind of sit-ups should I be doing? Maybe it should be a maybe I should be doing Russian twists, rotational types of work.
Yeah.
Right? And so
versus crunches, which, like at surface level, it's like, oh, we need a strong core, but it's like a step further, I guess, it sounds like is what you take it. It's really an assessment of like, what are the demands?
If I'm going to lift something ground overhead with a golfer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a med ball and I'm going to have them stand upright and then lean over, touch the med ball on the outside of their left foot, and then reach and twist a total of 180 degrees and reach to the sky instead of from straight between their legs, straight overhead.
Because everything's rotational for them.
Because we have to look at the movement. And so what we're doing is adding precision. So I read that you're into this modern decathlon, right?
Oh, you did some background as well. Table has turned, I see.
Well, I got it. Right. So I know like if I was training we would be looking at those events and we would be assessing you and your strengths and weaknesses, but also your genetic makeup. Okay. Are you a fast twitch, speed, strength, power athlete? Or are you more like me, better in longer time domains, endurance, aerobic, slow twitch work? And we would be targeting the workouts that you have to do and then also your strengths and weaknesses that you currently have and creating a better balance in there. And that's not being done in these generalized programs. Right. And so if we're going to retain somebody, they need to understand that what I'm providing is personalized for them and that they get then buy-in, that they get it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned golf, and I think we're going to now sign you up to be my decathlon coach. But
I like those events, by the way.
It's, it's fun. It's tough. And actually, if you want, I should make an introduction to you to the guy who runs it. It's a fantastic cause. And there's a lot of, similar to CrossFit, right? It's 10 different events all in one day. There's probably a lot of people who would benefit greatly from your programming for some of the, more endurance and speed strength events. So if you'd like, I can introduce you. I'm sure he would love to promote your stuff. But where was I going with this? So golf, are you actually working now? You mentioned surfing, you mentioned golf, and of course we know about CrossFit. Are you working with athletes across all sorts of different disciplines now? Is it kind of like broadened out?
So like golfers, yeah. So I am. I'm working with like professional PGA golfers. Surfers. Awesome. I went to North Shore and have, friends there. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And lot of it is branching out into movement. And so one of the things that, like if you take and then also like professions like firefighting. Yeah. Like there's certain professions that there's always been a way that they've done their training. And the problem is that it's dictated by tradition versus logic, and science and methodology. And, cardiorespiratory disease and firefighting is something that's really bad. And one of the things that unfortunately the way that they train is that they're having to wear 60 pounds of gear. And so the logic is that we need to teach these athletes, like train them to be strong, and we need to generate power. Well, they're always working, 1 rep lifts, or they're working short sled sprints. And it's like, well, that's great if you could climb a set of stairs with 60 pounds of gear in 10 seconds. But when you get to the top of those 3 flights of stairs, you can't function because you can't recover. Yeah. And
and for those guys, it's life and death. Right. I mean, literally. Yeah. Well, what more could be on the line than that?
Well, and if you look at, the way in which most firefighters are dying, it's because of their cardiorespiratory fitness, their aerobic fitness. And so just looking at firefighting, they have to wear a tank, to go in there. And that tank will typically last them 20 minutes. Well, if you're a fire chief and you're looking at your crew and you're looking at them in terms of like we would do in a business world of production capacity, I have a fire. I have the resources in terms of people, but really the resource is how many tanks can each one of those resources carry to fight this fire? And if every one of them can only manage one tank and they're not safe enough to go back in because the recovery is limiting their performance, then it's pretty easy to do an assessment on fighting a fire based upon the number of tanks. I might as well let it burn because I don't have enough resources.
Right.
But what if I improve their aerobic capacity, their ability to recover, not intensity side, but the recovery side of the equation? Now maybe I could double their capacity.
Yeah.
Instead of hiring 2 times the workforce, what I can do is use the same workforce, but instead of training them based upon speed, strength, and power, what I do is I train them in a jogging and walking program, focusing on the recovery, not volume, not their intensity. I focus on the third variable, which is the recovery.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Is looking at a situation and where do we make an improvement based upon the known pieces of information.
And that kind of dovetails into similar, like talking about tradition and the historical way of doing things versus like logic. You know, you already alluded to this as well. Like there was this notion that, and you know, with when you were working, I think it was with Khalipa, and I can't remember the other guys you mentioned, but the thought that by doing this longer endurance aerobic capacity training, you were potentially ruining them for like, maybe I imagine the jump was like their quick twitch, their speed, their power. Yeah. Are you finding that has become, and it's kind of a loaded question because we see what people are now doing in the CrossFit Games, and I think it defies what we thought was possible. But are you finding that notion that like, hey, by doing long-term endurance, you're giving up something on the fast twitch side of things, or is it more nuanced than that?
That's a great question. Yeah, one of the things that if you just quickly do a search and you look at this interference effect, and one of the things that interference effect that you will find is that if you do too much of one thing, it will interfere with another. So let's say that you're a strength-based athlete and you start a cardiorespiratory type program, a running program. Well, the interference effect is saying that if you do too much of running, it's going to interfere with your strength. Right. And so that was one of the things that I battled early on in the CrossFit space, because strength is one of the key requirements to top level success.
And the weight that these guys are throwing around.
Well, like Rich Froning. So Rich Froning is a classic example. He put 425 pounds over his head. He's 198 pounds, 5'9", and he could put 425 over his head. So you work with a guy like that. And the problem is that when I started working with him, he had already won the CrossFit Games 4 times. And he had a mile, he could run a mile in 6 minutes. And when I looked at him and I did an assessment, he ran a lap around the track in 60 seconds. He was very explosive. He had tremendous speed. And what I did was I looked at the relationship between his speed and his endurance. And what we do is I look at those two numbers and I look at what we call a fatigue factor or a coefficient of slowing. So we all know that we can't maintain our 1 minute maximum effort speed for 10 minutes. We slow down. Right. But it's the rate in which we slow down tells us whether or not we need more anaerobic speed-based training, or do we need more aerobic, longer time domain training. It tells me where to weight their priorities.
So it's go ahead, please.
You go for it.
Well, no, I was going to be a knucklehead and I was going to take a guess at what that looks like. And I figured you're the expert. Listeners would probably benefit from hearing you explain it a little bit further than me sitting here pondering, being like, oh, I wonder.
So we all know.
So I'll let you continue.
We know that as we do a movement and we do it at maximal effort, as we move into longer time domains, it shifts from where we're getting that energy from in order to contract the muscles. And as we get beyond 3 minutes, it starts turning more and more into an aerobic activity. So if you are interested in becoming better aerobically, or better at time domains longer than 3 minutes, then you need to work the slow twitch aerobic side of the equation. But if you're a Usain Bolt and the longest you need to run is 200 meters or 20 seconds of time, then you should be focusing in on more specific training. And so what I started doing was looking at movement and looking at an anaerobic time domain versus an aerobic time domain and looking at that rate of fatigue. And that's how I can help identify where's the highest value of your time. So you, in your decathlon event, I mean, you got to run what you have 3 run events, the 40, the 400, and the 800, right?
Yeah, man, you're on top of it. Yes. And the 500 meter row, which is a nightmare, but yes, go on.
But the row is rowing, right? So
yeah.
So the thing is that you would have to look at those 3 events and the demands of those, but I would look at you and go, okay, so wait a minute. These are all short time domain events, even the 800.
Right. Yeah.
And so I wouldn't even look at, other than if your recovery between events is weak, then I would deal with the aerobic side of the equation, meaning like your body can't recover because the 400s in the beginning and the 800s at the end. What if you're so blown out from doing the 400 that you can't actually restore your muscle fibers for the next events? Well, that's an aerobic level adaptation. So that would be something for me to consider, right? Like Usain Bolt, he's not training aerobically, but he sure has to take consideration of prelims in the 100, the 200, the 4x1, the semis, the finals. Recovery between those matters. It matters. Yeah. But we don't want to train him being an aerobic athlete. Same thing for you and your event. I would never train you to be aerobic other than an accessory piece to help you recover between events. So that's what I ended up like really targeting was I need data. And I need data that is for an athlete that's not a sports-specific athlete. Because if I look at runners, their fatigue factor is completely different because they're specialists. Yeah. So going back to Froning, for example, one of the things that I realized is he has a very fast 400. It was 60 seconds relative to his mile time. His rate of fatigue between those, if you look at the slope, was around 28%. Okay. A good number is somewhere around 22.
Okay. And is that a good number for like
a recreational runner?
CrossFit? Oh, okay. A recreational runner.
So someone who runs just recreation, like for health and fitness, but they want to ride a bike, they want to go to yoga, they're running for 2 times a week for fitness.
Got it.
And so that told me that in order to reduce the percentage from 28 down to 22, I need to improve his aerobic side. I need to improve his mile time. So what did I do? I just slowed him down. I slowed him down. And what was always, so with Froning, what was nerve-wracking was he was the greatest CrossFit athlete in the sport by far at that moment. Yeah. And the risk is not that I couldn't make him a better runner. Of course I could make him better running, but what if I ruined him as a CrossFit athlete? And this brings in that interference effect. And one of the things that I realized early on in working with the other champions that now had gone on to win the CrossFit Games before Rich was that every one of them, by doing a moderate amount of running every week, especially at lower intensities, they were getting stronger. Matter of fact, there's not one elite level. There's not one elite level athlete that I've ever worked with that has not gotten stronger. And it's about finding a proper balance so that this interference effect, which no one can quantify how much is too much. Yeah. They can't. And so part is where are we finding a complementary amount of volume? And most of what CrossFit athletes do or recreational athletes do is they're standing and supporting their body weight. Yeah. Well, when we run, we're standing and supporting our body weight. Well, if you are doing, let's say, a lift, when you make that 1 rep lift happen, what muscle fibers are being recruited? Well, they're all being recruited. But what if you've never actually trained your slow twitch fibers? What if your slow twitch fibers are not available to you because you've never actually created any level of adaptation? What if all of your intensity is just targeting your ability to generate force, power, speed? Well, when now you go to do a standing upright lift, such as Froning doing a clean and jerk, his standing support muscles, the slow twitch fibers, the rate in which those fibers are recruited and the percentage of those available fibers are greater. And every one of his lifts has gone up. So in that first 10 weeks, Froning said, my vertical leap went from 31 inches to 33 inches. All of my lifts went up. Matt Fraser, who's now the most dominant CrossFit athlete in the sport, who I've coached since winning, every one of his lifts, the same thing. And so that's where working with a large population of people, especially on the elite end, to answer some of these unknowns, or maybe it contradicts what's happened, because I'm not working with a weightlifter. I'm not working with a runner that's interested in just doing the mile. I'm working with an athlete that wants a variety of fitness. And that is a different spectrum of the population. That is the recreational athlete that sits in the middle. They're not on the extremes. Right? I'm on an extreme in terms of endurance, and Usain Bolt's on the other end. I'm talking about middle population with a balance of slow twitch and fast twitch fibers, and how do you train them? So Froning can put 425 over his head and he can run a 520 mile.
It's so interesting that you say that, because are you familiar with Cal Dietz?
Of course. I've read that.
My basic training. Yeah, it's amazing.
I know it well.
So I just had Cal on, and kind of like this, the conversation ends up going a completely different direction than you anticipate. But one of the things, but it's far better than whatever I was going to ask you. One of the things we were talking about is he's big on fasted cardio. Now, not to the extent that like you're going and you're, he's having his elite athletes go like, balls to the wall, but it's like, hey, 20 minutes steady state, get your heart rate up. And I was like, really, even for your guys who are sprinters, because he works with the track team among, a lot of other, what you would consider to be like short sprint or, fast twitch type athletes. He's like, yeah. He's like, it actually helps them too. He's like, I have them, then they do their workout in the afternoon. But he was like, basically, if you're just someone interested in general fitness or an elite athlete, like I still recommend it. He's like, I do it every day. And we didn't get that next level deeper. You explaining why, just even in the example of like Rich lifts getting better, it's because now like there's slow twitch muscles that maybe now have been trained that were never trained before and can be recruited. So that's really, really interesting to me.
But that's, so as we were saying from the beginning, that's the key, is that you need, as a coach, in my opinion, to explain that so that the athlete now understands there's more purpose, there's more intent. Because let's face it, if any coach can keep an athlete, they're going to make them better. Mediocre coaches, so long as they keep coming back. The problem is that there's so many shiny objects over the coach's shoulder that distracts people. And so what is your strategy on retention? Because that's the number one. You have to retain them. And so that I really feel strongly about, explaining the purpose, but doing it in a way, it's interesting. Coaches, I hear them all the time, and they start talking science, whether they understand the science or not. The problem is, if that athlete doesn't understand, and what I mean by an athlete understanding what you're saying is they're going to be able to relay that information to a third person, and that third person now understands it. Yeah. If an athlete can't repurpose that content and tell somebody else, it was a total waste of time. It has to be relatable. It has to be understandable. If you start throwing even the word lactic acid around, people, it's a mind bender for them. They auger into the earth. They don't understand. And so part is that it's not, and I'm not saying dumbing it down. What I'm saying is it's a coach's job to make a connection so that they find that purpose, that value. Yeah. And that's where I spend a lot of my time is finding a way to get people to stay in the program, to retain them. That's where the constant quest is.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really an important thing in my opinion. But like Cal Dietz and what he like, amazing creative ideas. You know, one of the things that I've often used in swimming, which I grew up swimming, was hypoxic breathing.
Okay.
And in football, you guys can use like a training mask to simulate fourth quarter fatigue by shutting off airflow, right? That would be the time to use a mask where, what is it like to be completely gassed? Well, I'm just going to restrict the flow of oxygen so you get, 10% of what you normally would. Okay, so there, we've simulated that.
Yeah,
but I keep going back, and early on, I was thinking, in swimming, and it's proven through research that hypoxic type intervals in swimming has tremendous value. Why isn't that done in other sports?
Yeah.
Right. And so part of it's just not thought about, because in the water, it's easy to hold your breath because you know what? I'm just going to keep my head in the water and just not breathe. And so part is like looking at what other sports have historically done, which science and athlete performance has vetted out. And are those opportunities available for other sport or other movement patterns?
Right.
And if we're going to do it, right, like let's say you do, like a lot of people would say, if you're going to swim the length of the pool with holding your breath, you go and you take a deep breath in. Well, what Cal Dietz and what he is like, when I read through that, I'm like, wait a minute. Why take the deep breath in? Why not start it with an exhale? Yeah. Let's go. If we're really pushing that, what's the purpose of the inhale? Right. Yeah. And so part is that that's what I'm talking about, is taking these concepts that are out there. For example, we said about runners, runners, endurance, they do an interval, let's say a 400-meter interval, and then they do a 400-meter jog. Right. Versus other athletes that will just do their 400 and then they sit around for 5 minutes and then they do another one, and they get good in the recovery in sitting around and doing nothing. Well, if you take that same principle, and what we want to do is build your push-up capacity. Let's say you got to do max reps of push-ups. So what's your limitation in your push-up? Is it your 1 rep bench press? Or is it that you just get tired after doing 40 of them? Right. Well, if it is your fatigue, then what my job would be is to improve your ability to clear fatigue while doing push-ups. So how are we going to do it? Well, what I want you to do is, let's say I'm going to have you do 6 reps of bench press at 135. Let's make it 10 because that's not going to be that heavy for you. And then what I want you to do is rack it and then pick up a PVC pipe and mimic the same movement pattern with the PVC pipe. Nice and slow, active recovery. So what do you normally do between your reps on the bench? You sit around and do nothing. And
so check the phone.
But if your limitation is preventing you from doing more push-ups is that you get fatigued, then what should we work on? Well, I don't want you to work on more volume in terms of bench press. I don't want you to lift more weight in terms of bench press. I want to attack the 3 minutes of sitting around, and I want to actually get you to move. So what I'm going to do is have you do your jog recovery with the PVC pipe, but for the sole purpose of, I want you to focus on the same movement pattern, the same muscle groups, but the concept is recovery. So instead of you sitting around and doing nothing, I'm now getting you to repeat the same movement pattern that just created fatigue, but the intent is clearing fatigue. So you're now doing, if you did 5 rounds of bench, you're now moving in the movement pattern of a bench, but the focus of the workout is time. I'm working muscular stamina versus my strength. Yeah. Oh man, that's so there's a lot of people maybe who do some NFL combine training who should be taking notes here. But so what is actually happening? And then I know we're going long here. So I'll add this one and then one last question for you. But you know that's what I love, right? Because I'm getting you to want to stay. So it's a sign that I'm doing. Yeah, no, man, this is great. Well, I could do this all day, but so what is happening when you say clearing fatigue? Because I think for a lot of people, they're like, okay, that sounds great. What's actually happening in the body that's going to cause that adaptation that you're looking for? So when we work anaerobically, fast twitch fibers, what we're doing is we're creating this lactic acid, right? So lactate, which is a fuel really, and then the acidity, and it builds up into the muscles that are moving. And if you keep working at that high rate of speed, that high force, that lactic acid is going to spill into the space between that muscle and the neighboring muscle, and eventually spill into the neighboring muscle, and then it's going to go into the bloodstream. And that's called lactate shuttle. And when it goes into the bloodstream, what it's doing is it's trying to find vacant available muscle fiber to help clear it. So the way your body works, the body is an incredibly logical thing. Our fast twitch fibers create this fatigue, but our slow twitch fibers, it consumes this fatigue. So if you are an athlete that's more aerobically fit, what happens is it grabs that lactate and it consumes it as a fuel. And when it consumes that lactate as a fuel, it takes the acidity out of the body. And so there's this balance between creating lactate with high intensity, but clearing it with the low intensity. And so if you have a limitation as an athlete of like, I just get tired in a particular movement, then it tells me that maybe that's the area of focus that we should be working on. So as a coach, you can't work on everything. Like I said with Froning, do I work on his speed or do I work on his endurance? Well, what we need is we need to be assessing movement and getting feedback from an athlete and going, you know what? The reason why I can't do 42 push-ups in a row and I can only do 41 is I just gas out. I get tired. Well, do you want to be able to do 42? Yes, I do. Okay, so then you know what we need to do is we need to be focusing on your slow twitch fiber in the movement pattern of a push-up, in doing an active recovery versus sitting around and doing nothing, and clearing the fatigue. And what we're doing is we're actually tricking that athlete while doing it into more volume, but we're disguising it as active recovery. Like you.
Yeah.
That sounds like an easy workout. I'm going to do 10 bench press at 135 and then a minute of PVC slow as I want. The only rule is no stopping, 5 rounds. Okay. Well, that PVC pipe, I guarantee, is going to get heavy because
you get pretty heavy
because you've never done 6 minutes of unbroken bench press.
No way. Not even close.
But that's the same thing that holds true. You take a sprinter and you say, sprinter, you know what you're going to do is 5 100-meter sprints, and you're going to take 3 minutes of rest between. Sprinters like all day long. But now you turn around and you tell the sprinter, you know what? You're going to sprint 100 meters, but instead of sitting around and doing nothing, what I want you to do is I want you to do a 400-meter easy recovery jog in between. So instead of doing 500 meters of work, now you're doing 2,500 meters of work. Now they have a muscular stamina failure. You're training the direction of the weakness.
Yeah. It's so funny you say, and again, not to reference Cal Dietz, but like I'm starting to see like you both are incredibly successful, like in your own pursuit, right? And he kind of made similar examples of like, look, there's opportunities even within like, let's take the bench press. He's like, look, you know, just going up and down, you're just training kind of like one aspect of it. And you know, and I think we've talked about triphasic training on this podcast enough that people are like, all right, come on, Ken, keep going. But what he was talking about this last time is like, look, like define where you're weakest within that movement. He's like, if you're weakest at the bottom and like the bottom 4 inches, he's like, let's do like go down and then do mini reps at 4 inches and then go all the way back up. So like finding an area within that movement where you can, like, to your point, get more volume in the area that you're weakest.
Right.
So that you can get an adaptation that's actually going to like propel you forward, or I guess closer to your goal. So I'm seeing a lot of similarities, and it's really cool because I think it's like, oh, this is where, you know, these marginal gains can be found, right? By taking a step back. Okay, you're pausing. Go ahead.
Well, no, but I think it's also that it's about looking and providing precision, and it's great if you could get somebody. So take the rope climb example that we talked about earlier. If you're doing a static hold on the rope, then what I would want is your weakest. So the rope is next to your body. It's next to your chest. So you've got that rope right next to your lips and you're holding there. Yeah. Okay. Which hand do you put on top?
Oh yeah.
I want your weak hand on top. Your weak pull hand, I want it on top. And that's the higher value of time. And that's what I'm talking about. If you're going to do a static hold on a rope, then which hand should be on top and why?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And
that's what separates the average coach from the elite coach.
That's where, but again, I think that this time, and let's face it, this COVID thing that's happened, coaches are more accessible now than they ever have been. I can't tell you how many free Zoom calls I've done within the community. 50. And would I have ever done that? No way. It's such a time commitment and I wouldn't have done it. I think that what athletes now should recognize, anybody that's listening, reach out to coaches that are out there in the community and ask them for a sampling of workouts. Look at these coaches and what do they provide? I had someone ask me the other day, and he attended a seminar that a free class that I did in NorCal 2 years ago. And he's like, hey, you mentioned in this thing that you have some maybe assault bike into run workouts. Can you send me some? I sent him 8 workouts that showed the different variation of exactly what he wanted. And you know what? It took me 5 minutes to send it. I have them available. Yeah. Athletes out there, if they're wanting to dive into getting a better understanding of, instead of vanilla, generic garbage programming and looking for precision, contact the coach because we're all accessible. Yeah. And ask for a sampling. Yeah. And make it specific. You want skier into a row workout. You want an assault bike into a biker. You want a seated workout on a bike into a standing bike workout. Yeah. Send a sample. And that's what is out there right now. It is an incredible opportunity. And if a coach doesn't do it, cross them off the list. Because for me to send you 20 workouts, I'll give away workouts for free all day long. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Well, and so let me ask you this, right? One, you clearly love it. You're clearly passionate about it. And we can end on this question. You know, for you, hearing you took that big risk on yourself, which I think might be the most powerful thing of this entire conversation, to go do something that clearly you were passionate about without there being a clear economic return that could even come close in the short term, right, to what you were currently earning. Ton of risk there. You have kids. They're college aged. They were, right? It's like, I mean, that's a huge risk. You know, now you've clearly established yourself as an authority in the space. And in addition to coaching, I mean, world champions, you know, you have this awesome platform that you've built, which we can certainly, you know, I'll definitely promote and you can tell people a little bit about it as well. Like, what's next for you? Like, are you excited about what you're doing now, or do you have something else on the horizon for yourself that you feel is like that next frontier for yourself? So what I'm passionate about is looking at various sports and looking at what historically has been done, just as CrossFit was focusing on speed, strength, and power to build aerobic capacity. Yeah. It defied the logic for me. And part is like surfing. Here's a good example. Most surfers, you know what their number one injury is? A blown ACL. They're coming down the wave and chop hits them and they've got the leg kicked out, the knee slightly bent, and boom, it pops the ACL. Oh, wow. That's the number one injury. Well, then the question would be is, okay, if that's the case, why? And how can you, through an improvement in a training protocol, reduce the risk of that injury? Well, so the first thing that you would want to know is that how are they training? Well, because surfers only paddle, they always do upper body type training. And my comment to them is that, yeah, but look at what happens, that when you're paddling out into a lineup and you're paddle, and there's a lot of high intensity surges, right? Intervals between waves. Yeah. And so there's a high intensity sprint and then they recover, catch their breath, and then they sprint again. Well, lactic acid builds up in the muscle groups that are moving, right? The arms. Well, it goes into the bloodstream. And where does it go? It goes to the legs. Imagine if you think your legs are fresh because they haven't done anything. They've just been dangling behind you, sitting on the board. Right. And you're not aware of the way in which the body tries to remove lactic acid and lactate shuttle. And then you go to stand on a wave thinking your legs are totally stable. Right. And they're not. Well, what if you then improve the leg's ability to clear fatigue? What if you start a kicking based program so they can put fins on, long fins, short fins, no fins, and they just go out in the ocean and they have a kicking based protocol? Well, now behind them, when they're paddling out in the lineup with small movement, they're activating those slow twitch fibers and helping dissipate that lactic acid. And so when I look at what it inspires me, it's looking at professions, looking at sport, and how can we provide value that logically makes sense, like the firefighting example that I had. Like, how can we do that? And I'm a firm believer in giving away the programming side of it for free in those areas. And then where the value is for me is the educational content, the application of these concepts to make a shift in a methodology that more logically makes sense and that's more sustainable.
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, and so where can people find out more about you? You know, I mean, I know you put a ton of content out there for free and you're clearly incredibly generous with your time. And now I'm afraid that you're going to get a slew of emails, people requesting workouts, but that
I love. So,
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where can people find you?
So they could find me on aerobiccapacity.com. That would probably be the best. There's an Aerobic Capacity Instagram. There's a Facebook page. I have my own Instagram, but I would just go to aerobiccapacity.com or the Aerobic Capacity Instagram page and just look through the Instagram. And then if you want to reach out, you can just DM through Instagram and just say, hey, you know, it would be cool if you can send me, I'd love to just check it out. Can you send me, a couple of workouts that maybe even be focusing on 400 meters? Maybe it focuses on the 40-meter sprint. Do you have any warm-up drills for 800-meter program? I mean,
right.
Those I readily have, and it's easy for me to just send an attachment through and help educate people because here's the thing. I really, really could have been a better athlete. I could have been better. And I look back on my career and there's regret. We all have windows of opportunity when we are doing certain things. And what I want is to maximize that potential in that moment. And what people need to understand is this information is now readily accessible. It is up to you as an athlete to find the better way, but it's out there. So just take a little work instead of just looking, this magical thinking is over. It doesn't magically appear. You got to put in a little work and start educating yourself. And if something that a coach sends you resonates, then there's your coach. But ask. And if they're not going to provide it to you, then bail, because there's a million of them out there. And if that coach resonates, then they're going to respect your time. And that way there's more precision and intent towards your goal. And I wish I had that. I really do. And I think about that in every workout I write. Is this truly, if this is the one workout they do this week, going to bring it for them?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And you know what? It's funny. That resonates with me because that is one of the goals of this podcast, right? And that's kind of the first way I'm trying to approach it. I feel like there's so much knowledge, yourself included, right? I mean, like let's take the aerobic capacity piece of it, right? Like just the goal is that someone's listening to this, they take a little piece from that and it just kind of lights that spark. And if they're willing to put in the effort, they know where to get the information, right? Yeah. And then just extrapolate that out across disciplines and different areas of interest. So very thankful that there's folks out there like you doing the good work.
Thanks, man.
We really appreciate it. And hopefully, people will follow up. They'll look at aerobic capacity. There's a ton of information there. So thank you, man. Thank you. Of course, like I said, for being so generous with your time. Appreciate it.
Well, no, thank you, man. I'm all fired up. I don't know what I'm going to do after this.
Yeah, I know. Go climb a rope, do some bench press.
I love it. This is really good, man. I it's been a while since I've done a podcast, and I'm not often nervous. I was a little nervous coming in just because I don't know your questions, and I love what we spoke about. It really it inspired me as far as I think maybe I made some good choices along the way.
I think you did too. think you do too. I think you're going to inspire some other people along the way too. Well, awesome. Well, we'll have to have you back in the future, and thanks again.
Man. Thank you.